Welcome back. This is A RAP CRITIC. It's Malik 16 from Plates and Crates. And no, not everybody in Harlem had Mace on their top 5 rappers list. Clearly, if you can't tell, we're still going over our classic review of the classic album from 1997, No Way Out by Puff Daddy and the Family. And the split was so big between Bad Boy and everybody else that even if it wasn't a rap act that was formerly known as an underground, a super underground act, they became that. That's how big the divide was at this point in hip hop. It went from, you had Bad Boy, and then you had an album like Diamond D coming out that year, or the Beat Nuts. But then the popularity had surged so big that acts that were on equal levels just 1 year prior, like Wu-Tang and Bone Thugs, were now in the same boat as those underground acts. You might as well have been the Artifacts that year if you were going out in this Bad Boy year. Wu-Tang and Bone Thugs dropped double albums in the year 1997 that went quadruple platinum separately, respectively, but still got little to no radio play, with this massive wave of Bad Boy that was just taking over everything. That's how big that year was. That's why I asked the question, did Bad Boy run rap or did it ruin rap in the year 1997? Because I remember that. I remember being like, man, why don't they play Scary Hours? Why don't they play As High as Wu-Tang Get? Why don't they play Impossible? Granted, I'm naming the songs that I like that are not necessarily the radio hits, but not even like It's Yours, or from Bone Thugs, like Look Into My Eyes, If I Could Teach the World, Hating Nation. I'm just like, where are these songs? Tell me if they were playing it in your radio demo, depending on what state or what part of the world you lived in. But man, you could not get around Bad Boy 97. And again, you're either with them or you against them. You know it. If you have not already, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. Would appreciate that very much. And I'm not gonna waste your time. We're gonna jump right into it. Category 2, which is the rap performance on the album. Dimension 1, personality and charisma. Now, Puff Daddy is a figure in hip hop that makes this dimension pretty tricky and almost impossible to separate everything you've ever thought or heard about him from who he is on the mic, right? And so on this album, if we're trying to ignore all the mythos and the baggage surrounding the name Puff Daddy and the Bad Boy family, and looking at the stripped down, bare bones presentation of the way he tries to convey personality on this album, then at the very least, I would say what you get possibly for the first time, besides, outside of interviews, is Sean Combs. And I think he was very adamant about showing a glimpse of Sean Combs. I think he references himself as Sean more than he does as Puffy on the album. I don't think you're gonna hear him say Puff Daddy a bunch of times on this album at all, but a lot of times he'll speak of himself by name, and he wanted you to feel like, yes, I'm the flyest, I'm on top of this rap mountain, but I'm also a man who is shedding tears in my mansion, wiping them with $100 bills. I do think that's there. Where it falls flat a little bit is how well he's able to push this personality across with his, with his rapping on performance. So we'll talk about that as we go into Dimension 2, but it'd be interesting to hear what you all think about if there was any personality on this album. I'd say from the guests, especially from the guests that we had not yet gotten a chance to hear from on their own projects, unless you were deep rooted street mixtape, connoisseur. For a lot of people, this was their first time hearing the locks and being able to distinguish the three members from each other. From the moment Styles P jumps on the first verse of Power, it's like, oh, if you didn't know who Styles P was before and you got him mixed up with Jadakiss, well, now you know. Jada does the same thing, Sheik does the same thing. You get their distinct voices and personalities. And then Black Rob, who I mentioned, had a very standout, if not the standout feature on this album. What he brings to the table is the personality. It's this gruff voice. It's this storytelling. It's just a presence that you didn't feel anywhere else. He definitely earned his spot on the Bad Boy roster and made a stamp even with one song. So just talking about Diddy's personality, Puffy's personality on this album, I do think that's what's trying to get conveyed. I do think you do get this glimpse of Sean, but I don't know how impactful it is. Something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 2, which is the suspension of disbelief and the believability factor. Now, very interesting album here, because as believable as it's supposed to be, right? Bad Boy could stand on this rap mountain and make these boasts of having money and things being all about the Benjamins, because for the most part it was true. But on those other songs that I mentioned, the darker songs, Puffy does make a lot of references to kind of being the guy who might, order the hit, who might carry out the plan. There's lines where he's like, he puts his hand on the trigger. It's like, do you really believe Diddy was walking around with a gun? So those are the kind of moments where I kind of feel like there is this suspension of disbelief quality to Bad Boy albums that they wanted you to have. Even if we go back to Biggie's album that got released in 1997, what was being built, that Bad Boy empire field that was being built in the year 1997, was this idea that we are living like mobsters. We're giving you a movie, a glitzy movie in audio format. And I think Puff was really keeping that spirit alive and still kind of really building it. This was the album that came in the middle of Bad Boy year, right? If Big set it off in the spring with his Life After Death album, this was the summer album, the blockbuster, and then Mace was the round out, Harlem World, right? So, and all throughout those albums, you get that. You get these real larger than life glam songs, and then you get these dark street tales that are always story driven, always cinematic, and always, in this mafioso vein. So even Puff playing a role, talking about, being the one to carry out the order. It could be debated. I would really love to hear what you said. We've heard Eminem lines, we've heard insinuations, we've heard jokes for decades now of Puff being the guy that would actually put out hits. So maybe it's just exaggerations of the truth. I would love to hear how much y'all believe Puffy on these deeper tracks where he's talking about who he can get got and how he can get retaliation and revenge. Songs like I Love You Baby and What You Gonna Do. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 3. Oh boy, delivery and use of voice. It's not delivery, it's DiGiorno. Seriously, growing up in this era, if this was not a joke among my circle, among the real hip hop lovers, the hip hop heads, it surely wasn't a joke for SoundScan and BDS. To the masses that bought into this Puff Daddy as a rapper era, it created a monster. To the average listener, his rap sounded no different than anyone else's rap. To the hip hop listener, this was the most wooden performance, the most stiff, no life. How many takes was this? Did you have any coaching? If you did, it would make it even more unfortunate. Puffy didn't have delivery. Puffy went in, recited lyrics. There's about 2 songs on here where Puffy sounds a little natural. And ironically, one of them is This the End?, where he is rapping double time and twisting and written by Twista. And he actually follows that cadence more naturally than any other song in the album. The second song, where it sounds like he's got himself in a pocket, is Don't Stop What You're Doing. I don't know what the difference was on his performance on that track, but he actually sounded like he felt what he was saying. Maybe he had something to do with the writing. Maybe he practiced that song longer, but on every other song, it really is evident that there's very little projection, very little inflection, emotionality, and he tries. It's not for lack of trying. I feel like Puffy tried, but I don't feel like Puffy tried the way a rapper would. I think Puffy tried from a space of knowing I don't have to do this, and it shows. And I think we see that with a lot of people who try their hand at rapping. It always comes off with a little twinge of something missing. And that's what's going on here. There's no groove that's followed. There's no push. It's just recitation. And that was a running joke for a long time among the hip hop purists, because this man decided to get on the mic, went multi-platinum, and a lot of rappers who were hungry, starving for this, could not even get their fair due, couldn't get a spin on the radio. And then Puffy proceeds to rub it in their faces with the lyrics on certain songs. So, insult to injury. Besides the fact that the hook on Friend sounds really misplaced and comes out of nowhere, like they just splice, the singing into it. It was just not in the right key or anything. Diddy's singing is his choice to sing, because he's been singing from the beginning, or doing a little chanting or whatever. You gotta get the man props for being bold and free and not caring, because making the choice to do the Senorita hook himself, doing the Pain hook himself, the Friend hook, is a bold choice, man. It speaks to just how much he wanted to tap into the musicality and the artist part of himself, or at least try his hand at it. And I can see him say, nah, I'm gonna do this myself. And they're like, you don't wanna have so-and-so do you? You got Carl Thomas back here. He's like, nah, I got this. And boy, some of the worst hooks in history. Senorita and Friend. I'll give you a pass on Pain. Pain was, beautifully abstract. It just hit right enough where it's like, okay, this is not crazy. At first you're like, who's this? What is this? But I wish this pain go away. It works. But boy, I'd clap it up for Puffy for having that much confidence and faith in himself. But boy, it goes into that whole stiff wooden performance. The singing is not that different than the rapping, y'all. Something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. I often say that Puffy is an echo of whoever writes for him. He will follow that flow pattern, but not necessarily be a chameleon and metamorph into that. It's just, okay, someone else wrote this, you can tell by the flow pattern and maybe some of the words used. Which takes us to Dimension 4, flow. All right, just like delivery is lacking, naturally flow is going to be lacking. But there are different flows on this album, and that is largely due to the contributing writers. The contributing writers on this album: Jadakiss, Mace, Sauce Money from the Rockefeller camp, right? From Jay-Z and Big Daddy Kane, come up. And you also had some writing there from Black Rob, rest in peace again. And you can tell songs like What You Gonna Do, I Love You Baby, that are story in nature, these real, grandiose plot and scheme kind of movie scripted kind of raps. Black Rob, that's his vein all the way, that's his bread and butter. And Puffy was rapping with words that Black Rob would use, rapping the cadence, but you could also tell that Black Rob tailored some of the lines from, like, assuming I go back to my regular life of a millionaire playboy rocking the mic. Like, cool, it works, but that's a different flow than what Jada is gonna do, who is more similar to Mace, where there's breathing space between the lines, there's more slick talk, there's more flashing and flossing. So Jada wrote the victory verse. Jada also later wrote, parts of Senorita, and then Mace, of course, writes for Puffy on the songs that he's on, like Been Around the World, Can't Hold Me Down, and even pieces of Friend. And those are slower. You would think those would be easier for Puffy to kind of get into a groove with, but still know the flow pattern is there, but actual flowing doesn't happen. And then Sauce Money comes on and helps out with some of the more thought-provoking songs like Pain and I'll Be Missing You. But each of those styles have their own schemes, pretty simple structure. No one here is trying to make Puffy the lyrical master, because they also want it to be commercially viable. They want it to have mass appeal and spread as far reaching as possible, and also be easy for Puff to execute, which again surprises me when we get to songs like Is This the End, where he really takes command of that double time flow and gives, kind of the same performance that Biggie did on Notorious Thugs. It's not far from it. From someone that doesn't naturally rap like that to be able to grab it. I don't know how many takes that took, once again, but kudos. Gotta give Puff his props there. I would love to hear what y'all think about the flows. A lot of breathing space on these flows. Really, A, B, A, B, or A, B, B, A rhyme schemes here. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats takes us to dimension 5. All right, the wordplay and the bar intent. This is the Jiggy era. This was the tail end of the Jiggy era, but boy, this was the big year for the Jiggy era. So that was what the emphasis was on throughout these lyrics on the album. Not a lot of metaphors. You're gonna get some similes, but everything here is gonna be cute and pretty basic. You're gonna get slick talk. That's as close to punchlines as you're getting, even from the guests. Like Jay-Z and Biggie on air, known for punchlines, but on their verses, not a lot of that. More slick talk than anything. Probably some of the most memorable Biggie lines is, anyone, Tyson, Jordan, Jackson, just naming names, just saying things. A lot of mafioso talk. Jay-Z, the line that a lot of people quote from this is, mentally been many places, but I'm Brooklyn's own. Even Jada, Jada's just throwing out, rocking the 3/4 reptiles, Styles P just talking greasy, and everyone else storytelling. As far as wordplay, you're not getting much more than slick talk. It's a very straightforward album. They were staying on top of what the time was, because the emphasis was on being a trendsetter and driving home this point that we are the flyers, right? Bar intent, just so you deliberately get what's being said. When it's a serious song, the intent was for you to feel like, okay, this is the serious song. When it's a flashy song, it's for you to get the, okay, get up and dance. This is for the radio. So something for y'all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 6, which is punchlines, poetic wisdom, and quotability. And I would say yes, based on the examples I gave in the last dimension, there's plenty of quotes here, just because people have a lot of emotional ties to this album. People remember where they were at in this era. This was a very ubiquitous album. It was everywhere. And so a lot of the songs get cemented into memory just from the sheer fact that they were being played 15 times a day on the radio. So you're able to quote, especially someone like Biggie, who for a lot of people, this resonated because these were his final words on wax. They didn't know there was going to be a Born Again album and plenty of mashups and remixes and unreleased songs. For them, they heard these were the final verses recorded by Big, so these burned a hole in people's brains. Things he said on Victory, things he said on Young G's stays. And Jay-Z being someone who was more emerging at the time, people were paying attention. The Lox being a group of rappers who were emerging at the time, people were definitely locked into what was being said. The Benjamins, you're gonna remember every word because that song was being played for years and years on end, relentlessly. So the quotability is there just by default. As far as poetic wisdom, I don't know how much poetic wisdom you're getting on this album. I don't know if they're dropping lots of gems and food for thought collectively on this album. But there's imagery, like in the storytelling, that I think really drives home the feel of these songs. Again, I keep using the story is like what you're gonna do and I love you, baby, because when Black Rob says something like, it's all about the Benjamins, true, that be the motto, ran out of ammo and started throwing bottles, like you picture that. That's the stuff that Nas does when he tells stories, where you can see the sounds. That is a skill. And so there is that. Punchlines, again, I told you, slick talk is what you're getting the most. Play it please, I'm the macaroni with the cheese. Just not a lot of boom, landing bars that make you go rewind that. The rewind factor is very low here unless you just like the slick talk that's being said by your favorite rapper on this album. There's plenty of favorite rappers to pick from on this album. You got everyone from, you know what I'm saying, The Lox to Twista. And so there's a variety. You got Busta Rhymes even on this album. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to Dimension 7 concepts. There's conceptual framing, but not a lot of direct concepts here, mostly in the stories. And I kind of want to save some of that for when we get to storytelling, because it'll give it away, right? They're kind of one and the same. Senorita and Friend sound like they're songs for women, about women, but Friend is just loose, because Foxy's verse, she's just doing what she does. As I keep saying, she's not staying on the same tangent that Diddy is on. Diddy is talking directly to a woman and goes into sex talk for the third verse, and Foxy's just talking about gangster stuff. So, if that was a concept, it got lost. Senorita, he's not just talking to a young lady. It's clear that I'm talking to a young lady of Latinx, Hispanic descent, Puerto Rican to be exact, and I'm trying to impress you with my ways. He's trying to tell a loose story in there, and I'm trying to impress you with my knowledge of Spanish. Like I said in video 1, this was the J-Lo dedication song. But Pain is the closest you get to a concept where he's staying thematically on topic, where he's talking about 3 sources of regret, pain, grief, and remorse in 3 different verses. But, we'll get into that when we go to the next dimension. So not any real deep concepts here, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. And that takes us to Dimension 8 and Dimension 9, which is going to be your content internalize and your content externalize. And this is going to be a matter of understanding that Diddy is not talking about many things outside of himself. Very true to Scorpio nature, just like I mentioned about Drake in the very first video explaining this channel. Diddy is not talking about world issues, politics, social ills, hood life. He's really, if he's going to be talking about something that's not flying flashy, superficial, or relationship and sex related, it's going to be from an introspective space of me and my woes, me and my worries, me and my issues. And so you get a lot of that. I said before in video 1 that the undercurrent on this album, the subplot, because there's 2 major themes. The second theme on this album is the theme of, what am I gonna do now? I'm stressed, I'm grieving, I'm depressed, I'm unsure at times, even though I'm sitting on the top of this rap hill, I'm sitting on top of the game, and I'm the boss. I don't know if I want it anymore. So in songs like Pain, he's reflecting on witnessing his father's murder from a young age, being betrayed by a woman, being responsible for the deaths at the city college way back in the early 90s, I believe 1991, 1990, the stampede that killed a fair number of students at city college, that he still, he said, I know the truth, but I'll shoulder the blame. Meaning, he's like, look, I'm not even gonna waste your time trying to explain the ins and outs of why it wasn't all on me, but for all intents and purposes, it's my fault, right? So I regret that to this day. And then of course, reflecting on Biggie's life on not 1, but 2 songs, and loosely throughout the whole album, even at the end of a song called Victory, right? With Biggie on it, he ends it by saying, what I'm gonna do now? Yelling in distorted vocals, what I'm gonna do now? Right? So that is holding the album as its anchor. For every high note of, yeah, we got this, we got it sold, we the best, is, are we? Do I want this? Do I want to just give it up? Will I die? A lot of fascination with death, which, feel what you want about Diddy. It could be argued that it was a superficial play because all of the greats at that point had been rappers who talked about death or contemplated their own demise, and maybe Diddy just wanted to fit in and feel heavier than he was. Like, oh, now I have, or it was genuine. Maybe, you know, again, it was coming from a real place. Look at what he had just gone through. Look at what he's telling you he went through. It's not just something that brand new happened in 1997. He's no stranger to tragedy, and he wanted to share that. I mentioned before where, you know, he wanted to present Sean Combs to you. You know, albeit that Sean is still this mogul, he's like, I still have my issues that I'm dealing with. And then you hear this other focus on him, you know, continuing to mention his son Justin and passing on the throne, or at least holding on long enough to pass on the throne. Because every time he contemplates life, he kind of circles back to this idea of, well, I'll stay on long enough to see Justin take over. And it's very interesting to see where Justin is now. Very, very interesting. So there's a lot of content from the in going out, but not any from the out going in, unless you talk about him reflecting on death in general. But that only still comes from a space of, I lost big. Let me just talk about death in general now. So that's Dimension 8 and Dimension 9. Something for you all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. How much content, external and internal, do you feel was on this album? And then we get to our final dimension, Dimension 10, storytelling, where there are no full concepts on this album. This album is not devoid of stories. Almost everything on here is a story. You know, there's pieces of Senorita that's a story. Is This the End is a story about him dying, almost somehow someone aiming a gun at him, and a car crash, and being saved by a stranger on the highway. And then you get What You Gonna Do, again, being set up by someone who's supposed to be loyal to him, turning around, putting the hit back on him. Same thing with I Love You Baby, being set up by a woman that, you know, him and Black Rob were separately dating, the same woman. I don't know, you know that was Black Rob's third verse that he just gave to Diddy. So being set up and betrayed by a woman, running for his life. That is a recurring theme, but all the stories are different. That is the bad boy formula. If you listen to Life After Death, a lot of Biggie's songs were, the story songs were about the same kind of subject matter, but slightly different. And so that's how storytelling comes into play on this album. There's lots of it, there's tons of it. And I must say, the storytelling is pretty intriguing. It does grab you in for the time that you're in it. And so that's something for you all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. How compelling was the storytelling on this album? And that completes our category 2 wrap up and review of this album, No Way Out by Puff Daddy and the Family. And I'd love to hear how you rank and score this album. Do you consider this a classic? If so, where does it rank in the pantheon of classics? And you know what to do. Leave it in the comments, DM me, email me, and let's get this global hip-hop community going. If you have not already, please like and subscribe, spread the word, tell a friend to tell a friend. Until then, F a Rap Critic. Talk about it while I live it. Word to Mr. Meth.